Before we get into the questions, I want to ask you a question. What is your favorite Civ pun?
Civ pun. Well, I did just earlier today. I said in response to talking about some development stuff. I said the rest is history. So that's a pretty classic one.
That's a good one. I like that. So, are you guys ready to get the interview started properly then?
Sure.
Anytime, sure.
A lot of people are wondering about the modding capability of Civilization 7. Do you guys have any information to share about modding at this point?
We do. Modding is something we haven't talked a lot about, but it's still a foundational part of how we want any of our Civ titles to launch and get embraced by the community and really have that sort of longevity for players where they can try all sorts of different things over time. The modding system is similar in Civ 7 to what our modders are used to previously. So we still have the game effect system that uses XML to tie abilities to leaders and civs. Carl works with that day in and day out to hook up all the content that he as a content designer is creating for us. So we can talk a little bit about that, but in general, it's going to be very familiar to people. We're on roughly the same timetable we've been on with previous games, where we get the game out, and then we package up the modding tools and really send those out to the modding community as well. We expect that timeline to be very similar to previous titles.
And another question I've heard from people with regards to modding: will there be any modding on platforms other than PC?
PC is obviously way easier than the other platforms, so we don't really have any news about other platforms right now. It'd be lovely if it was as easy on those other platforms. And we certainly thought about, is there a pathway there? We don't have anything to announce right now.
It's one of those things. It's a completely different architecture ecosystem. Whereas like a PC, it's very open. It's just like I can just download whatever file. So for me, the most exciting mods for Civ 6 were like the really cool leader mods and the new civilizations and stuff. Are there any mods you guys are excited to see? Like any features that you would like to see players kind of join the sort of their creativity with, if that makes sense?
Well, one thing I'm excited about is if you've looked on, say, our Reddit community recently, once they understood how the ages system worked, how it was structured, and how different historical pathways through a Civilization 7 game could be set up, you saw these amazing charts with hundreds of civilizations just for like the European paths through the game. It's going to be tricky for us to create that on our own. But with the help of the mod community, you might be able to see something that rich, that deep, that amazing come to life. So I'm particularly excited by that in particular.
Cool things that they can do with it. So there's a lot to look forward to.
And in general, we've broken our game up into pieces. It's a little bit less monolithic than it was before. So I think there are lots of ways, as we explore this over time, that the mod community is going to find Civ 7 a very, very rich environment to be working in.
Absolutely. I mean, Civilization, at least as far back as I want to say 4, has always been a sort of conversation between the developers and the community, where the developers come out with some sort of new content, and then the community fire back with suggestions and even their own creations, right? And it's kind of been like a journey together through the development. I'm sure there's people on the team who probably started out as modders or something of that capacity. But moving on now to the ages system. It's one of the most exciting and interesting changes, as far as I'm concerned, because it opens up so much space, including modding space, right, that we just talked about. Like, for example, the map expanding in Era 2. Does the gameplay also expand in Era 2 and Era 3? So, like, are new layers added that weren't there in the previous ones?
Yeah, so we have gameplay systems that are unique to each age. We've talked about distant lands and how the map opens up once you reach exploration. So there's a lot more naval gameplay that happens there, and there is more of the map for you to explore. We'll have more details on that in the future. We've also hinted that religion plays a bigger role in the exploration age, and that definitely comes into its own and influences the gameplay a lot more. And there are things like that in modern as well, but we're not ready to talk quite about modern yet.
Yeah, but
But
you're
and
willing to
sort of
hint,
to
though.
add, yeah,
Yeah.
another hint about how these changes might occur is with the fact that we have an economic legacy path within each of the three ages, and the way you pursue economic greatness in each age is very different from the previous age. They're all tied to resources. So the way resources get exchanged between people and collected, that all plays a role, but the exact mechanism feels very historically appropriate for each age and is very different.
And that's true for all of our legacy paths. It's not just economic, but those change for each age and provide very different gameplay and things that you're trying to pursue that feels historically appropriate for that time period.
Awesome. I'm excited to see how the sort of gameplay expands with the map as we go through the eras. One of the things that happens when a Civilization game is announced, or really any sequel, is that there's often a lot of positive feelings about the game, but sometimes there's more apprehensive and sort of worried feelings about the game. Like people sometimes worry that the new game won't be as good as the old game. Um, did this have any influence on like how you were developing the game, or how the game was developed? Like this sort of, how would people worry about the sequel, so to speak?
I might take that in a slightly different direction.
Sure.
What I'm going to do is talk about the fact that there was this both a worry when we first announced changes, but also the community in Civ 5 and Civ 6 knew that we were going to roll out the game in a certain fashion, and that we had become pretty predictable, that we're going to put a base game out and there are going to be 2 expansions, and then maybe you shouldn't wait till the second expansion to buy the game because that's when the content was going to be complete and full. And I think what we found is maybe we just have become very predictable. And maybe this formula we've been rubber stamping the formula out in the same way each time. And I think knowing that the community felt that way sort of challenged us to think about whether or not the formula needs to be shaken up a little bit, and whether we should think about Civilization as a title in a broader, deeper sense, and challenge ourselves to maybe think about whether or not not just how the game rolls out, but sort of how the game is structured should be thought about at a deeper level. So I think it wasn't. I think there were 2 factors in terms of why Civ 7 is so different, why it has restructured the game. One is this idea that we've been doing it sort of the same way for a while and it was time to change things. The other was that we had a lot of people on the Civ 7 team that had been on, some of us on Civ 5, most of us on Civ 6. We had created games that were pretty similar for a while. We were pretty confident that we knew what the DNA of a Civ game was, and if we were going to restructure it, we could still make it feel like a Civ game. We could still deliver that one more turn feeling. So I think like the Civ 6 was the first time I was lead designer, I would have been pretty hesitant to make a very significant change there. But for Civ 7, I think we were ready to do something a little bolder.
Awesome. I love the ambition. And like you guys were very predictable. I remember I learned your patterns during Civ 6. Like I would know, like, okay, I can't remember what it was, like Thursdays. It was like 11 a.m. my time or 1 p.m. or something. I would open up Steam to see if the announcement of the next sort of DLC had been put up, and I'm like, okay, they didn't put it up, it's not coming until the next week. So I was able to like reliably be the first person to like post it to Reddit and all that sort of stuff, like, because I knew you guys were very predictable, and I think it's interesting that you've gone in an unpredictable direction with the game, and I'm just really excited to play it. So this is something I've been trying to explain to people, but they have been reluctant to hear my message. But my vibe on Civ 7 is that it's basically a love letter to the Civilization fan base, to the people who love Civilization, right? It's you're trying to get rid of all of the annoying nitty gritty things like micromanaging workers back and forth, micromanaging population. I don't know if you've played Civ 5 recently. I've been trying the game out, and I think my clicks per turn is in the hundreds, right? Because I'm moving units and I'm moving population and I'm readjusting priorities and everything. And that's fine for the first 40 turns of the game when you've got like 2 to 3 cities, but it starts to expand, and it really feels like You guys have been working really hard to get rid of the things that get away from the actual gameplay. What do you think are some of those changes that are love letter changes that haven't gotten the attention they deserved since the announcement, and you want to give them the spotlight right now?
Yeah, you're definitely right. It is a love letter of sorts. We have paid a lot of attention to the things that the community has wanted and been asking for, and yes, ways to sort of simplify that core gameplay experience while still providing the depth that we know that high level skill players are really going to want. We have a one of our gameplay pillars, design pillars, is depth, not complexity. So we've tried to reduce that amount of required complexity that is forced on the player every single time they engage with the game, and add instead depth for players who are looking for it, but that is not required right out of the gate. Um, I think that there's a lot of different places where we have put work into the game to make it easier for the player. I think one of the ones that hasn't been talked about very much right out of the gate is how we've redone our terrain yields. So we know that there is a reputation in Civ 6 that the player will re-roll a lot at the start of the game to try to find the perfect spot. You want 2-2 tiles, 2 food, 2 production. We know that you want tiles with hills and forest on them, and that there are very specific things that the community would be looking for. We wanted to reduce that and get you into the game faster. So one of the things that we did is we changed our formula for our terrain yields. We've changed it by biome. Every single biome has its own sort of inherent flavor yield, and then the rest of the tiles are all the same yield. You don't have trees, vegetation adding yield separately to the map. So if you have trees on a hill tile, as it were, from Civ 6, that no longer provides a different yield than a tile that's flat with trees. They're all the same. And then they get that biome yield added on top of it that gives you the difference between your different start locations. So you might re-roll because you're like, okay, I want a science heavy start, so I want to start in tropical. That's our science biome. So you might be looking for that specifically. You might be looking for specific starts with certain civs or leaders. Say Egypt wants to be on a navigable river, and if you happen to be unlucky enough to spawn not on one, that's something you're going to want to redo. But overall, we've tried to reduce that micro at the start of the game, make it a more unified gameplay experience so that you can just start playing faster. That was also a drive for multiplayer because we want the start locations to be a little bit more balanced, and to not start a multiplayer game and take one look at your map and go, oh, well, I've lost this compared to, say, another player. So, unifying that and bringing it in was definitely a big goal there, and it's something that we've not really highlighted so far.
And actually, I've worked specifically on rewriting parts of the map generation code. 2 parts that Carl just mentioned were the way we do start positions. We used to generate the map and then find places for the players. Now we kind of figure out where we want to start people in a somewhat more balanced way and then generate the map around them a little bit. So that's sort of a different approach that's better for competitive multiplayer.
Oh, that's
the
really
other
interesting.
The other thing that we're doing is we've totally rewritten all the start bias code. So the leaders and civs are separate now. But if you manage to synergize and you have Hatshepsut and Egypt both, your start bias towards the navigable river is going to be basically double.
Huge, yeah.
And I can't remember the last time I started a Hatshepsut Egypt game and didn't start right on the navigable river. So there have been some changes to shaking up the formula and rethinking things sort of every little step of the way, and those are some really good examples of it.
That's awesome. I love the idea of sort of plonking the civilizations down first, and then kind of creating like a patch of map and then stitching them together, because it makes it much more. I don't know. I really like that vibe. There's something about sort of you create the geopolitical situation and then you fill the map in. I'm sure you felt really good that day when you thought of that.
It's something I've had to take 3 or 4 passes at to get it to feel both like it's still an organic continent, but it also provides that level of balance that we were looking for. So after that one day, I felt okay, but maybe after the 3rd pass through and I started looking at it, then I started feeling particularly good about it.
Brilliant. That's all awesome. Something else that has actually, I think it's come up in other interviews, but I do want to ask you this is every big change in Civ 7 feels like an evolution of what came before. So, for example, Barbarian Clans was the sort of beginning of the new independent peoples. For example, you had leaders able to lead multiple civilizations in Civ 6. Now any leader can go with any civilization. Age transitions were acting as like a soft reset, I guess. Were kind of similar to the Rise and Fall, the Dark Age, Golden Age. Oh my God, my brain is Civ 6, I think it was. Was it Rise and Fall?
Expansion.
Rise and Fall expansion.
Yep.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought halfway through that question. That happens. Look,
You already were naming it. You're right there.
This was the point of the question. Was there a feature that you tried to evolve, right? And just no matter how you tried to evolve it, we have to bring it back. Like, what was is there anything you tried to change, but we're like, we can't make it work? You know what I mean? Like, was there a change you had to walk back that just didn't feel right?
There were some features that we had to throw out multiple times before we could finally get it right. Diplomacy took just an amazing journey to get to where it is for Civ 7. We actually, I think this is Diplomacy System 4. We actually threw out 3 different diplomacy systems before we finally ended up with this one. We wanted the idea of a diplomatic currency that we'd done that a little bit with Beyond Earth. We knew that that would be a better representation of actually who was a strong diplomatic player and parts of the game. So we had the idea of a diplomatic currency, but how it was going to work in the game, how it was going to be spent, how you're going to earn it, when you were going to discharge it for various costs. We got that wrong 3 times. And we actually had multiple different designers jump on and say, I'm going to take a crack at it. I think I have the right plan. And it was not several different designers took on that challenge. So that was one where we knew we wanted to change things up. We didn't like the fact that in previous Civ titles, being good diplomacy was almost how many times were you willing to bring up a dialogue with a leader and check to see who was going to offer you the best deal for your iron. That just didn't feel strategic. It felt like busy work.
It's fiddly.
So we knew we wanted to change that part, but trying to get it right was hard, and we had to be willing to say, this is not working. We have to throw this away entirely. And the 4th iteration of that came on pretty late on the project.
Yeah.
By the time we worked our way through 3 different rounds, and we had to say, no, it's still not working. We still need a 4th iteration here. That was pretty risky because it was pretty late in the game, but we're really happy with the way that the final iteration of that turned out.
Brilliant.
I would. That even applies to something as core as our civilizations. I remember early on when we were first implementing the unique civics trees and trying to represent the whole of an empire, the whole of a civilization's history through that. We went way overboard. Greece that we just revealed is a really good example of this. We're trying to represent Athens, we're trying to represent Sparta, we're trying to represent other city-state nations within Greece, and Sparta is a land army, and Athens is famous for its navy. We have culture, we have science, we have diplomacy, and so by the time we were done with it all, it was like, oh, this Civ is good at absolutely everything. And we did that with everyone. And we're like, oh, all these Civs are all good with everything. This is probably not how we should design this. And so we had to pull that back. And so we really trimmed a lot of content out of that and took another look at it and went, we need to focus each Civ more and make sure that they feel like a unique way to play the game rather than just going ham on representing everything that they were good at.
No, 100%. And it's one of those things where careful limitations on a player's agency create opportunities for creativity in gameplay, right? Like, a perfect example is some games are like, you can't go to peace with anyone. You have to be at war all the time. So you figure out like, okay, if I build fortresses here and I just park units here, I'm kind of at peace because they can't invade me and I can just ignore them. Like, so whereas if you could just do everything, well, you'll just always do the most optimal thing, right? So you always want to have careful sort of limitations on what players can do. That's really cool to hear about that. Where is the strangest or most unlikely place that inspiration came from for a feature, civilization, an ability, anything in Civilization 7?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's two parts to that. There's strangest and then there's most unlikely.
Okay.
I would say that none of it is unlikely, right? We took inspiration from books, from films, from other video games, from obviously history and really researching it and diving into it. Like Ed has mentioned, we have a whole team of historians and being able to talk to experts in a variety of different fields has been absolutely incredible. So none of it, I think, is an unlikely source. Whatever you think we probably use for inspiration is probably true. Um, but strangest, there have definitely been some things that we've looked at in terms of archaeology and ancient artifacts and ancient inscriptions that are a little bit more odd or strange. It's been really fun to look at all of those types of things, but when you're looking at high resolution images of inscriptions on rock faces in very remote parts of the world, you're like, "Oh, I've really got down a rabbit hole here."
So we're kind of into the more fun questions here. Uh, how how involved is Sid Meier in the Civilization game production? So I kind of personally have this vision of him as like the company guru that like sort of sits at the front office. Uh, and if you need guidance or inspiration, you go to Sid and you sit down with him, and he talks you through a problem. How true is that idea I have in my head of him?
It's pretty reasonable, actually. And there are two examples of things that Sid did that helped Civ 7. Um, so the number one thing that I started with, the very first thing was I wasn't happy with the Civ 6 movement system. So I liked Civ 6's movement system better than Civ 5's because Civ 5 it was always the incentive was to take that last little bit of movement you had left and go into a really difficult terrain with it and sort of cheat your way up onto that hill with woods or
Yeah.
whatever with that last little movement point. And Civ 6 didn't let you do that. So it was better, but what I hated about Civ 6's movement system was the fact that, oh, you have one movement point left and all the terrain around you costs two movement points, and your guy's stuck, and you have to have an extra click to say, well, just skip the rest of his turn. And that extra click just adds up over and over and over and over again. And how many Civ 6 games have you played here? It's So I went to Sid and I said, look, we've played with different movement systems. This is a problem. I've been thinking about this and I still, the solution I came up with for Civ 6 was not optimal. It was better than Civ 5's, but we still need to solve this problem. So he came up with a suggestion of let's use terrain as a turn ender. Because then as soon as you hit that difficult terrain, you don't have that extra click. You don't have to hit your spacebar. And so he offered to prototype it. He's got this game engine that he just like whips up whatever type of prototype you need. And the very first prototype of Civ 7 movement with the terrain ending obstacles, the turn ending obstacles that we have now, was created by Sid. I played it. He played it. We instantly liked it. And that's how the new Civ 7 movement system came into being.
Awesome. Yeah, that's brilliant. I 100% agree. The incentive in Civ 5 was always to try and eke out that little tiny bit of movement, but in Civ 6, you the spacebar got a lot of use. And it again that goes back to trying to minimize the amount of micromanagement and extra clicks that players have to do that are unnecessary.
Well, and a
Oh,
point that you had mentioned earlier was the strategic decision space that arises out of these kinds of things, and I think that's a really good one. There's not really much that you can do in terms of strategic add-on for the previous movement systems, right? So we had like civilizations where you could get plus one movement. Grand Columbia, I think, all units got plus one movement, and that was really, really strong because of the way the movement system worked, but you would still inevitably end up with unused cases of that one movement. Um, Whereas turn ending ended up being something that was really interesting for us to design around in a variety of different places. Um, when all of your units with high movement suddenly can't move anywhere because it ends their whole turn, you want to find those interesting places that you can uh, manipulate that system, and it's been really fun to try to find those avenues and manipulate them, play with them.
Make roads and bridges and all
Roads
those
and
kind of
bridges,
things.
certainly,
Really fun.
yeah.
We haven't talked about bridges yet, but
Ooh,
navigable rivers mean bridges have
Yes.
to exist.
that's
So
true. I didn't think
that's
of
a
that.
tease, and that's something that people have not been spending enough time theory crafting on.
Yeah.
That is true. I'm quite interested now in the possibility of a bridge district, perhaps some bridge wonders in the later eras. Might see some returning wonders from Civ 6. You never know. I don't think you guys are ready to talk about that, I would imagine.
Not quite.
Not quite, but I'm teasing it for sure.
um, and so this is like the sort of last fun question. What's your go-to game to play when you aren't thinking about Civ 7, and why is it Balatro?
So I looked up Balactra. I actually had heard about it, but I wasn't really familiar with it, and it looks absolutely wild. I might have to investigate it just out of a curiosity standpoint.
Please, after
Um,
Civ 7 is out, please God.
I personally have not been playing too much outside of work because I have a baby on the way, and that has
Congratulations.
occupied. Thank you very much. That has occupied a lot of my time. But there's always something else on the horizon to look forward to. For me, that's the upcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows. I think that looks really interesting, really pretty. I'm definitely gonna play it. When we were at Gamescom, the Assassin's Creed Shadows booth was actually almost directly across from us. It was catty corner to our booth, and so we were getting inundated with Assassin's Creed, which was pretty cool.
Awesome.
But it's as an appreciator of history, it's fun to dive into a different historical fiction game and play around in that world.
And for myself, I might be very close to 100%ing Slay the Spire 1
Very
in
nice.
preparation for getting ready for Slay the Spire 2 to come out.
Cool.
So um, that's been keeping me a little busy. But like Carl, it's been tough to get quite the gaming time you want to have.
It's always a challenge.
I said Balatro because it seemed like all of the staff of Firaxis have been like retweeting about Balatro. So it's like, oh my God, is the entire company addicted to this game? Like, what's happening in there?
Ah, I see.
So I've run out of like pre-scripted questions. Do you guys, I imagine you've been conducting a few interviews today. What do you think was the most interesting answer that you could add to my interview to bump me up, make me seem a little cooler to a question you got earlier?
So there was a question you were asking about. I don't remember the exact wording of it, but it was something about the different ages and how gameplay changes across them and the interaction there. And one of the things that is new information is that there is a different commander type in each age. We're not going into details about what they are, but you can expect a new commander type to appear in each age.
Ooh, I'm already thinking like there's got to be some kind of. I'm brainstorming live here, okay? I tell you what, if I'm wrong, I'll buy you donuts, okay? Got to be naval commander in age 2, and at age 3, it's got to be like, some kind of like great general, like air commander, maybe something like that. It's got to be.
Those are interesting theories.
Yeah, they are
Just like
interesting.
your bridges, now it's time to start theory crafting on this one.
Absolutely. Oh, what if we have a space force? No, it's only the modern era. There's no space. Maybe there's space. Is there space? Can you tell us if there's space?
We're not talking anything about space, but I did start my career working for NASA as a contractor. So yes, so I will not forget about space.
And in our showcase, in our gameplay showcase footage, there is a rocket launch.
True.
So we do see a rocket taking off.
Is there anything you want to say to the community before the video ends?
I think just in general, the message we want to put out there, and we've talked about modding a lot, but what's really important is that, we're right at the point where Civ 7 is about to launch, and we're really going to, be engaging with the community this time, hearing what fans want to collaborate on, either them creating stuff with mods or what they want from Firaxis. So that's what's really exciting to us, is that we're very close to that point where this whole journey that we're going to take together with the community is about to launch underway, and that's what's tremendously exciting for us.
Awesome. I'm really excited for developer diaries. And Carl, what's your last word for the people?
You're the best fans in gaming.
That's right. And don't forget to pre-order Shakes Fist. All right. Love you guys. Thank you guys so much.
All right.
Thank
See
you.
ya.